Hi everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Recovery Talk. This week I am joined by therapist and clinical sexologist Dr. Jessica Singh for a conversation on sexuality and eating disorders, and overall what the impact an eating disorder can have on someone's sexuality. We also discuss things like body image, embodiment, asexuality, and why recovery is about more than just eating enough or just restoring weight. And sexuality can be a good example and reminder of this. I found this conversation so interesting, and I really hope you guys will as well. So let's get into it. Hey, Jessica, thank you so much for being here with me on the podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So, do you want to maybe start a bit introducing yourself and the work that you're doing?
Sure. So, my name is Dr. Jessica Singh. I'm a clinical sexologist and certified sex therapist, specializing in how eating disorders in particular impact sexuality. I have a group practice that is based in Vero Beach and Melbourne, Florida, in the States. And I focus more on sex therapy and eating disorders because they're both rooted in the same system in the body. And I kept hearing the same complaint coming from a lot of my clients when I was working primarily with the eating disorder. And when we started unpacking it, they would say, like, no one's ever told me that this would impact me in that way or affects my sexual health. So that got me very, very interested in learning more. So that in particular was the subject of my dissertation when I went back to grad school for my PhD. So the outcome of that research was the book that I just came out in February, Nourishing Desire. And that goes more into depth about how eating disorders impact sexuality and how we can move through it.
I realized how rarely those conversations are had in eating disorder recovery spaces. And I kind of just think, why is that? And I guess there is an element of taboo to it, but I also think sometimes people don't quite understand that link,
They don't. I don't think it's talked about enough because I think primarily eating disorder treatment is focused on keeping people alive. It's focusing on the physical health aspect and not so much about, maybe feeling alive or feeling fully embodied. So it doesn't help them really reconnect with pleasure, connection, anything like that. So there's a hierarchy. So I think once people are medically stabilized, it's like, we're good. We're done. And that's not the case. There's still a lot more work to be done.
For sure. And I think that's a thing with so many things in eating disorder recovery, where it's about, if you're not acutely dying, then you're fine, and get you to a certain weight or a certain intake, and then everything is good and great, right? But that's an important part of the work, but that's not the full work. Not to mention that many people are never underweight to begin with.
For sure. And particularly the sexual health impacts, they don't care what you weigh, they don't care what you look like. It's gonna hit you regardless. Just like eating disorders themselves, it doesn't matter what you look like. It's not about that. It's much deeper. But there's definitely that view that if it's not, maybe the eating disorder isn't severe enough or not seen as severe enough, that it can't possibly impact the sexual health, which is not the case at all.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And okay, a bit of a wide question here, but how does an eating disorder impact sexual health? I'm thinking both the more biological impact, but also the psychological impact. Not that they're always separate, but there are some slight differences.
Very intertwined. So the impacts can be maybe more apparent if there is more of a restrictive eating disorder because of the effects of malnutrition. But again, it can impact regardless of diagnosis and regardless of severity. But the simplest way to understand the biology behind it is the body will always prioritize survival over reproduction. So sexuality is considered a non-essential system when resources are low. So the restriction kind of will shut down the reproductive system. And because remember, desire is not just psychological, it's hormonal, it's neurological and metabolic. So,
Yes.
so the malnutrition in particular will cause hormonal suppression, which is vital for the reproductive system.
Exactly.
You
Exactly.
know,
And I see this often when working with clients that they may have been years or sometimes even decades with that suppression of their hormones, of their libido. And then it comes
yes,
back. And then it's like, what is this? What are these feelings, right?
it's overwhelming. Yeah, for sure,
Ex-
for sure.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm also curious because you mentioned some of the biological impacts. What could be some of the psychological impacts of an eating disorder or things like struggling with body image on someone's sexual functioning?
Ooh, so eat disorders in particular train us to kind of monitor the body, what it looks like, what we're doing with it, what we put inside of it, etc. So you're very much on the outside of your body looking in. So that is not good when it comes to sexuality because you have to be present. You have to be feeling your body. You have to be, with partner or partners. And if you're monitoring what you look like, you can't fully feel. So it's a disconnects.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting point that an eating disorder often is about like disconnecting from your body and the needs. And
Yes.
then sexuality is just everything but that, right? It's very much leaning into those needs, right?
Yes, it's about wanting and eat disorders kind of the wanting part it becomes disordered, like wanting of any kind. So there's a lot of anxiety that comes along with it. Much like when you're relearning maybe your hunger signals, you have to relearn what sexual desire feels like. You have to relearn what arousal feels like because it can be very, very overwhelming very quickly.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting with how this can show up with body image. If you're very much in your own head and you're very
Hmm.
much judging yourself very heavily, how that can show
Yeah.
up, for example, with a partner, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because there's a lot of again, surveillance, a lot of monitoring, looking at your body from the outside. So that might cause you to either avoid sex completely because you don't want to be intimate, you don't want to be seen, you don't want your body to be visible. You might avoid certain positions because you feel like you might look larger, you might look not great. It's not very, aesthetically pleasing in our view, right? It could also cause a lot of distraction if you're constantly thinking like, do I look okay? Like, are they, am I doing this right? And all that stuff. And that distraction will also cause that disconnection, will cause some element of dissociation, which does not work with sexual desire. That again, it has to be felt. So
Yeah, yeah, almost a bit like performance anxiety in some ways.
100%. Because we start to try to perform desire almost instead of just being embodied and feeling the desire. It's very different. It does become very performative unnecessarily and to the detriment of sexual pleasure. Being more in your head can cause more anxiety. It could cause like a bunch of other mental health conditions, but particularly with sexuality, it's just it just doesn't work. Like again, you have to be in the body to have that full sexual experience. If you're in your head, you're disconnected completely from your body, so you can't even feel what's happening. You can't feel what feels good. You don't know what feels not so good. Like this disconnects. They're almost separated.
Yeah, yeah. That
Yeah,
recovery is about leaning into, I guess, in a way, your body's needs. And sexuality is also about that. So
100%.
it's, yeah, yeah, I see. I see.
100%. Yeah. Hmm.
I'm also curious to hear a bit, maybe some of your findings, from your PhD, your book, your client work. What are some key, maybe themes and findings that you see when it comes to eating disorders and sexuality?
So the biggest thing I found is there's patterns. You see patterns as far as eating behaviors and patterns as far as sexual functioning. So I conceptualize it as a spectrum. It's a spectrum of control, right? And it has to do with how you regulate yourself in order to deal with emotions or intensity. So one side would be more over controls, which is it's too much containment, very restricted. That tends to have more restrictive eating behaviors, tends to be more avoidant of sexual experiences. On the far other end is more under control, where there's like emotion spilling out. It's very outwardly focused. It's like not enough containment. So that's where you're going to see a lot of maybe binge purge behaviors. That's where you're going to see a lot of using sex to regulate emotions or as validation. So you see like people somewhere along that spectrum, and it tends to line up with eating disorder diagnoses, but not necessarily. And in the center would be more regulated, be a little bit more flexible with control, able to be present, able to feel emotions, feel desire, pleasure without being overwhelmed. And will be more balanced eating and more accessible desire. So,
Interesting.
very quick overview of that concept. I go more into depth in the book, but that was the main finding, which is very interesting. And once you're able to recognize these patterns as they show up, you can start to work with how you tend to default and get you more to the center, a little bit more regulated in all aspects.
Interesting. So someone's relationship to their sexuality can sometimes be almost a bit of like a mirror to their relationship with food.
Well, yes, absolutely.
I think I'm also curious about is what's the difference between someone who may have, very suppressed sexual drive due to an eating disorder versus asexual identity? Because I remember reading a study, and this was a study done in disorders, and they were asking basically how they identify sexually. And a lot of them, something like, I think, from my memory, I think it was something like 1 in 4 identified as I'm asexual, right? And it's that thing of, is it a temporary state induced by malnutrition, or is it that is their sexual identity? And does that sexual identity in and of itself make someone then more likely to develop an eating disorder? It's a bit of like a chicken and egg situation.
Right. That's so interesting. I've noticed similar things in working with people, particularly with like restrictive eating disorders. And it is important to differentiate, to see like what is actually happening, because asexuality is a valid identity. It's not something we need to fix or mess with. It's fine. But eating disorder related shutdown is more of a temporary state that tends to go away as some symptoms improve, as we become a little bit more embodied, as maybe malnutrition is worked through and everything else is stabilized, hormones, etc. Yeah, and it's hard to tell like what comes first. It probably depended on the person. But you want to see if like that feeling of desire shutdown is consistent across, lifespan in all contexts, whether it shifts a little bit as we move through recovery, like really what's happening there. But it's very common for people to be like, I'm asexual. And then we find out that's not really the case. Not always. Not always.
Yeah. I guess there is a difference between asexuality as a sexual orientation versus temporarily eating disorder induced asexuality, even though it can manifest, I guess, similarly in terms of how it feels, with having low to no sexual drive, right?
Yes. It can feel very similar, and essentially it would feel similar, but they're different things. And again, the eating disorder shutdown would be temporary, and it would shift.
Exactly.
Yeah, asexuality is more persistent, more consistent, I should say.
Yeah. I guess it's one of those things that, well, recovery will give you the answers, right?
Absolutely. Full recovery, yes.
Exactly. So do you have any, I guess, more practical tips or advice for people who are maybe going through recovery, or they have an eating disorder and they notice that they struggle with, being, I guess, embodied and being present sexually?
Yeah. Oh, that's a hard one because it's really a long road, as recovery is in general. But in particular with that, like that reconnection, I would focus on a lot of grounding work, a lot of relaxation things. I would focus on moving about with intention, like no matter what you're doing, not just in a sexual context, but just like really focusing in, slowing down on yourself as you move through life, and particularly how you relate to people, because there could be some element of avoidance of people that happens as we get more focused on the eating disorder. It could be very isolating, right? So that disconnection from people can show up again in a sexual context. So re-engaging with others is an important thing to focus on in general, not just sexually, but friendships, family, everything. Yeah.
And that's such a huge part of recovery, kind of getting in a way back out there, right? It's like re-engaging with yourself, re-engaging with the world, right?
Yeah, yes, for sure.
I'm also curious about the topic of shame, because this is like a theme I see in so many people with eating disorders. Shame for having bodily needs. Just shame seems to be such a core emotion in eating disorders in so many ways. And I'm wondering how this may tie into sexuality.
Oh, entirely. Shame is a big, big theme in sexual health as well, because there's a lot of sex negativity in some families and some institutions. So even that state of feeling any kind of desire or sexual need can be internally punished when it was maybe at one time externally punished or shamed or thought to be something negative. So a lot of the work I do is around shame, particularly sexual shame. And the best way to deal with shame of any kind is to like re-engage and with the thing that makes us feel shameful. So that would be like having more relationships, having more sex, enjoying pleasure, all of those things. That being said, that's a process, and it's a particularly hard one for people.
It's like feel the shame and do it anyways, kind of.
Exactly. Oh, I like that. Yeah. But
yeah.
essentially, yes. So you're actively giving yourself permission and reminding yourself like there's nothing wrong with sexual health. Like it's essential to life, it's essential to our very existence on this planet. So why is this being shamed? So it's just reminding yourself of that.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And I'm also thinking, again, back a bit to how it may show up in treatment or in support scenarios, because I sometimes find that when people bring it up, they're very almost apologetic. They're like, sorry for oversharing. Like it's something that can be really hard to bring up, right?
Oh my gosh, so much. Even when people will actively come to me as a sex therapist, they're always like, is this okay to talk about? Can I talk about this? Because there's just been so much shame about talking about anything that has to do with sex. And there's a lot of shame with eating disorders anyway. So the combination is it can be brutal for people. But a lot of that is that, and a lot of why, again, in treatment programs, it's not really addressed because sometimes the providers either are not comfortable or they're not, they don't feel like they're educated enough to bring it up. So it just gets ignored.
Yeah, exactly. And would you advise for someone who's going through eating disorder to try and bring it up in treatment?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Always, yeah. Yeah, I think it could be hard because, again, you're going to come across providers that might be visibly uncomfortable with it. So I would try to broach the subject to see if they are receptive, or at the very least can refer you to a professional that is more receptive if you're having any kind of sexual concern. So, yeah, sex therapist, endocrinologist, gynecologist, urologist, whoever.
Yeah, exactly. And also, when someone is in recovery, is there a certain point in recovery when sexual desire starts coming back? Is it typically, for example, something that happens for people earlier, or is it like the last part of recovery to come back?
Oh, that's a good question. It depends. because there's some people, the desire is always there, it never left. That would be more the people that are maybe more under controlled, that are maybe using sex as validation. It's a little bit more dysregulated. So that's always present. But I would say, like, the further you get in treatment, the more it gets regulated, whatever side you're coming from, to meet in the center. But I think, like, the more you're able to reconnect with your body and trust your body again, that's usually when it might start coming back. So as, like, hunger cues are more normalized, as anxiety is reduced, because anxiety itself can cause low sexual desire for the same reason as eating disorders, going into fight or flight. And but I
Yeah.
see a lot of times when people enter, like, that partial recovery zone, that I'm recovered enough, but we're not really. Um,
Quasi. Mm.
yeah, you're still gonna have some sexual side effects there. Maybe it's getting a little bit better, maybe you're able to feel, but it's not complete.
Yeah, so it seems like it is very individual, but it has to do, of course, with things like nutritional state, but also things like anxiety and how present you are to be in your body. And like you said, also different people are going to have different experiences with sexuality and recovery. For some people, sexuality never leaves. For some people, they may get almost hypersexual using sex as a way of, I guess, validation or a way of managing emotions, right? Like there is a spectrum of
Correct.
it.
There's a spectrum, and then if there's other elements that come into play, like there's a lot of maybe abuse history in some people with eating disorders. If there's any sexual abuse of any kind, that tends to complicate things a little bit. So we do have to work through the trauma aspect and build feeling like physically safe in your body and being comfortable with another person and sharing your body. So that could make it a little bit of a longer road, but again, it's dependent on the person.
Because I guess someone can have someone can have libido but still struggle with sex, like sex, and having libido doesn't immediately mean that being sexually present is going to be easy.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you get to fully have that desire back. You could be able to be aroused. There's no pain, but you get into bed with another person and there's the shutdown because there's that fear. There's still that trauma there. Yeah. So it's important to look at your whole history, even going back from childhood, the messages you received from family and institutions, and if there's any trauma, if there's any invalidation of your feelings, like how you're learning to regulate your emotions, if you are more over controlled and under controlled, taking a full history, like I would do in session with someone, is I would take a full history, being able to do that for yourself to see what those roadblocks are and how you got to where you are so you can then untangle it. I have a whole section in the book that is helping you do that.
Yeah.
Like what questions to reflect on, things to look for.
Is there anything else that maybe we haven't gotten to in this conversation that you think is really important, or maybe wanna mention or bring some perspective on?
Yeah, I would just re-emphasize that we want to look at full quality of life when we talk about recovery. We don't want to just feel okay. We don't want to just avoid hospitalization. We want to be able to fully feel and be involved in all aspects of life. And that, again, goes far beyond sexual health. I'm talking in general, but we're talking about sex, so that's kind of what we're focused on. But so it's more about like feeling again.
I think it's so nice to hear that, because there are too many people who enter treatment where the bar is set for just surviving, just restoring weight, but very little focus on all the other things. Or even sometimes they aren't really told that it's even is a possibility to, to reach full recovery, right? It's seen as like, oh, you're always going to struggle with this. And that can be so discouraging. And it's so nice to hear we don't have to settle for the bare minimum.
We do not have to settle. And I've heard that before, like that, like, oh, full recovery is not like possible. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. That wasn't my experience. And things like that kind of kept me more in that partial recovery longer than I needed to be when I was going through recovery in, my 20s. Yeah, it's discouraging to hear people say that because it does keep you there. It's like, okay, well, there's no hope, why am I trying? I could still have these things, all these the lies the eating disorder tells, right? The things that could give you. Like, I can still have a little bit of that, but maybe I won't get forced into treatment.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you?
So, you can find me on Instagram at Appetites with Dr. Jess, at my website, drjessicasingh.com. Two primary places you will find me. I'm not great with social media. Did not grow up with it, but I'm trying.
Yeah. And your book, where can people find that?
So my book, Nourishing Desire, is available pretty much everywhere books are sold. Amazon, and in the US, you'll find it at Books A Million and Barnes and Noble. I think the UK is at Waterstones, TG Jones, and a few other outlets.
Thank you so much for your time. Lovely having you on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I've added a link to Jessica's website and social media in the episode description. I hope you enjoyed this episode. See you in the next one.